Alright, boys. Most y'all should know what this vid is about. It's about time I give my 2 cents on the whole situation. But first off, sup goats? It's Joe. Welcome back to a new vid. I hope you all had a Merry Christmas if you do celebrate. But today I wanted to talk about possibly the greatest dubstep Twitter controversy besides all the sexual assault allegations and all that has ever touched Twitter. Where do I even start, bro? I don't have a script written or anything, just a couple of tabs, pull it up. But yeah. So to the people that are confused, first off, I don't blame you. I know a lot of you aren't even on Twitter because it can be a very toxic place. This is common knowledge. But let's just start with this tweet that legendary producer Infect made on November 21st, 2022. That's over a month ago. Keep that in mind. 4:45 a.m. Bro says, Trench still sounds cooler than Riddim, to be honest. Now, as a standalone tweet, a lot of you motherfuckers might be like, hold on, what the hell is Trench and what does it have to do with our beloved, our dearest subgenre of dubstep, Riddim? I will get into that. I'm gonna try to break this down to all you with this vid. So first off, just looking at the comments, producer hot take, true law, bring it back. You just unlocked a whole bunch of memories. So you could tell that some people know what he's talking about, but some don't, just based off the replies here. If we scroll up and check a few more of his tweets, I was talking about the name, not the sound, right? To make a long story short, producers and fans alike, over 5 weeks after he tweeted the original tweet I just read out, are vouching for a name change to Riddim. They want to call it Trench now. They want to call it Trench. Now, this is not a thing that just manifested out of the blue. Apparently, Trench has been a thing for 8+ years. I personally had never heard of the term until he mentioned it in that tweet. But, yeah. Trench is everything and nothing. He talks about it a little, you know what I'm saying? He talks about it a bit. Have some clips and some tour videos mixed in. Trench is just a new name, not a new genre. Here's where we get into the history, which I obviously will touch on and expand on a little as we go on with this vid. Getter came up with it 8 years ago. Now we're using it for real. All of a sudden, Riddim is not a good name for the genre. That's why it's still dubstep, but a subgenre of it. Now, this kind of contradicts what he said beforehand with the it's a new name, not a new genre thing, because now he's saying that Trench is apparently something different, slightly. Not entirely sure there. And yeah, you can tell that he's facing some backlash. Obviously, I'm not going to pull up the comments to these tweets because we'd be sitting here for hours, but let's just scroll up a little more. Clarification. This is the point where it really started to get out of hand, right? Early December. I don't want to push the name Trench on anyone or divide the scene. I just want to have an alternative for those who, like me, feel like it's time to have a name for our genre that we like and feel proud of, and that isn't being used ironically all the time. But how fucking cool does I'm a Trench producer sound, yada yada, right? What differentiates Trench from other styles of dubstep? Working on a comprehensive definition, which he ended up putting out. He did make an article on this entire thing, which I'm gonna pull up in just a second. The reason why Trench came up was because the response on my fault. Trench sounded cooler than Riddim was overwhelmingly positive. Well, it still got its fair share of backlash, but I guess most of it was positive. I didn't see all that many people being down with it initially, but I guess I should have researched that shit more. So I thought, hey, we can make it a thing if people don't want to adopt it after all. Yeah, so you can tell people were coming out of the woodworks to kind of call him out on this. Even though Infect might be one of the most, what's the word? He definitely deserves to talk about something like this, seeing as he's one of the goats in Riddim / Trench. He's been doing it for a decade or something, and he's obviously certified in the dubstep scene, definitely a dubstep goat. One of the greatest to ever do it, but let's pull up the article because at this point his EP dropped. Yeah. Let's get into the article though. Why Trench? For the last decade, we've been casually referring to the more minimalistic and flow-focused side of dubstep as rhythm, which, does he even mention where it comes from? Yeah, he does a little. However, many artists and fans have not been happy with this name and its increasingly loose definition and usage. Let's take a look at the reasons, how Trench can serve as a solution, and what differentiates it from other styles of dubstep. Origins of the sound. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. When the sound was first pioneered around 2010 by artists like Jakes, Subfiltronic, Akira, Shivers, etc., shout out Koki and Book's Finest as well, for example, the artists themselves were referring to it as dubstep. That's obvious because subgenres really weren't a thing back in that day. Dubstep was an infantile genre in and of itself. In the early days, they didn't think it needed to be separated from the genre. However, as dubstep grew bigger and became more diversified, even reaching mainstream popularity, people felt like that it was hard to find specific underground styles without giving them names for categorization. Makes sense. That's how genres and subgenres are born. Now, the problem. As the sound was gaining more fans, a website called Clubbin' LV, which was popular among dubstep fans but was infamous for piracy, published a new category for the sound and called it rhythm. Many fans and producers of the sound were extremely reluctant to use this term. Nobody really knew who came up with it, while it was named after Jamaican rhythms. So, Wikipedia, for example, says that rhythm derives from the Jamaican patois pronunciation of rhythm, which does make sense in my head because rhythm is a very rhythmic genre, it being minimalistic and all, and especially because people like Shivers and Subfiltronic coming from the UK, and dubstep in and of itself coming from a very Afro-Caribbean background, it makes sense for it to be called rhythm back then, right? And they especially didn't want to validate a piracy platform that was generally looked down upon. So basically he's saying that rhythm was unofficially coined by a pirate website and that motherfuckers weren't rocking with it. Overall, rhythm just, you can always see people use it as a joke. So it was apparently used for ironic purposes. Then suddenly bigger artists started to use it. My bad if I'm stuttering a little. Often ironically, and it ended up getting so much attention that the name was now inextricably linked to the genres, much to the dislike of many of its own producers. And then, because the term was so widely used, often simply because it got a lot of attention, even if it wasn't fitting at all, the definition of the genre almost got lost completely. I personally think he's stretching it a little. Maybe he sees it from a more exaggerated standpoint because, you know, he very heavily contributed to rhythm in its early days and still does, but change is possible. In 2022, me and many other fans and artists feel like it's time to take control over the name of our genre back, new name that's more suitable, take matters into our own hands, redefine Trench, and then the origins of Trench. Now, this is where Getter gets involved in this whole discussion because apparently he created the genre 8 years ago. Yes. In 2014, bro dropped an EP called Trench Lords featuring Deemed and Algo, which were also rhythm producers at the time. Apparently he didn't like the term rhythm either, so he just decided to call the stuff Trench, named the whole EP after it. This is an excerpt from one of his interviews from 2014. Where do you see Trench going? I don't know. There's no real goal except to push quality heavy music and get rid of the god-awful term rhythm that some 15-year-old kid made up to describe dubstep. That's a hot take. I mean, I was always of the... I'm kind of losing my words here. I always thought that rhythm was like, you know, a certified name, a term for this shit. And apparently it isn't. Apparently it just stuck at some point, even though people didn't want it to. Trench has a solution. Thinking about it from a 2022 perspective, a perspective where the genre is more popular than ever, facts, and the term rhythm still being used reluctantly by many, the name Trench can come back into consideration, conjures up images of deep, dark, and grimy scenery. And this is where we get into the whole description of what Trench is, which is basically classic rhythm. to keep it simple. Minimalistic sound, less focused on loudness, flow, groove, atmosphere, more repetitive, darker, atonal sound. Claps instead of snares, 140, 145 BPM, no build. Personal decision. So bro basically abandoned the name Riddim completely. But yeah, that's that. Now let us check out, shout out Cubic. Bro got Infect himself to feature in his video explaining the whole situation. So I'm going to just play out his little part in it. Yeah, it's very interesting how this all played out, just generally. At first, I must admit, I was not down with the sudden name change, because to me it was sudden. Again, I've been listening to dubstep for a long time, but like I said, I'd never heard of the term trench beforehand. It's cool that Getter came up with his own little style back in the day, but 8 years after the fact, and Riddim being a term that people used for over a decade, all of a sudden to change it back to trench just seems nonsensical to me, or at least seemed about 3 to 4 weeks ago. Yeah, it just seems a bit late. We're closing out 2022 and this just comes out of the blue, you know? But let's let Infect describe it from his perspective.
What
yet again
is trench?
So the thought behind me calling my own stuff trench and me pushing for that change is that I think at the time when Riddim came up, nobody really liked that name. It came from a platform called Clubland LV, which was known for piracy.
And see, the thing is, with this whole Clubland LV thing, no offense, but if y'all really didn't like the name, then how did it stick in that way? Did y'all just roll, just go with it, just roll with it? I mean, if it really was a problem, y'all should have pushed back then. I don't want to step out of line here or anything, but that's just my thought process when I hear of something like this that happened damn near a year ago, you know? And I guess you can make the argument that it's grown to such a point where it was inevitable that the name had to be changed back, and back then it really wasn't much of a problem like it is now, because the term Riddim is being so misconstrued. That is a valid argument, but still, it's very sudden, especially to fans like me. I don't know.
And later also for leaking stuff. So we didn't want to validate that platform. At the time, we also didn't think we needed a name, and many other artists felt that way too. So everybody would always say, like, see Riddim as a joke, like see the term Riddim as a joke and as ridiculous.
Yeah, the whole Riddim joke thing. I mean, if producers like Infect say it was like that, and I'm obviously going to believe him, because again, he is one of the most essential producers to the genre. But I mean, I never saw the term Riddim as a joke. I don't know.
And then the big artists came in and they started taking it and they started calling our stuff Riddim, and they jokingly started calling their stuff Riddim.
Which, another thing I want to mention, these big artists bro is talking about, not to point any fingers, but dude signed to exactly the label that was misusing the term Riddim, that being Disciple. You see people like Virtual Riot, Barely Alive, even Dodge and Fusky use the term. That my assumption don't really have an idea of what it really is.
So increasingly it lost its definition a lot, but also started being inextricably linked to the genre, so we had no real way of getting rid of it. And I think a lot of people still kind of feel that, kind of being reluctant to use the term. It doesn't really fit with the genre and things like that. So I think it's time to kind of take control back and to have a term that has a clear definition and that we can also feel more proud to say. So that's where, in my opinion, Trench comes in, and I think that could be a good replacement, because Getter came up with it in 2014, and at the time the sound that he brought was very revolutionary, and I think it opened up the doors to experimenting with different new types of sound design within the genre, and I think the name just fits well with the genre in general. And so going forward, I'm making the choice to refer to my own stuff as Trench, and people can join me in doing that if they want to.
That's
but
cool.
Also if they want to keep using the name
fine.
Riddim, that's okay too. And I just want to clarify that it's
not that he needs my validation or anything, but in my opinion, that's completely cool that he wants to refer to his stuff as Trench.
about dividing the scene.
Especially since, I mean, it's not like this is a sudden change. I mean, the term was used back then, and he just wants to revive it, essentially.
It's about having a definition for the genre again and having a name that we can feel proud to say.
Well, there you have it, humans. Big shout out.
Shout out Cubic for this vid, though. Finally inspired me to make my own vid. Obviously, not as packed with quality. I mean, I'm recording on OBS with my webcam, but fuck it. Just had to get my thoughts out on this shit. But yeah. So hopefully all of you are now up to speed with the whole situation. Last but not least, my initial opinion and my opinion now of the whole situation. So at first I was not on board with it. I'm gonna say it straight up. And just because rhythm is probably the most ingrained term into the dubstep scene ever, you know, besides dubstep, the word dubstep itself. Mainly for it being the biggest subgenre, basically. And subgenres stemming from it as well. I mean, you have shit like Riddim and Future Riddim now. Are we just going to rename those to Bro Trench, Bur Trench, and Future Trench? That isn't really, that doesn't work. To me, at least. So I was obviously very skeptical, but then the article pops up, I read through it, it starts to make more sense. I check out the Getter EP, and it slowly started to click. I can't lie. I haven't completely 180'd on my initial thoughts. I still think that rhythm should exist as a standalone genre and trench could be something different, but I see why Infect wants to sort of, you know, get rid of that term to describe his music and the music of a few others. Now, as for my current opinion on the situation, yes, I feel like Infect renaming his own music to Trench is very fitting, as well as all of classic rhythm, really, OG rhythm. I feel like it's a great way to differentiate between, y'all know I like to use new rhythm, right? The stuff that Akeos popularized with their Labyrinth EP. That was just last video where I retro reviewed it. But like I said, rhythm started over a decade ago. This whole trench thing was 8 years ago, right? And now it's just being put in front of a more wide audience. Losing my train of thought. Shit. I really don't want to edit this vid. It makes sense to me to rename classic rhythm, Square 4, the stuff that pays homage to OG rhythm. Rename that to Trench, call it Trench, fine by me. But when it comes to this new rhythm stuff, you know, the stuff that technically wouldn't even be considered rhythm by its technical definition, I feel like that should not be called trench. It just shouldn't. Stuff like what Jory makes, or Unison, or Akeos Labyrinth type shit, basically. When it comes to OG stuff, like the stuff Infect makes even now, you know, it's still very reminiscent. You could still call it classic rhythm. I don't have a problem with that shit being called trench, or Subfiltronics music, Akira, Spas, Hacks, etc. I guess it might overcomplicate some things, and some people might call it unnecessary as well to have essentially separate rhythm and call some of it trench and some of it rhythm, but it kind of does make sense. It kind of does it not? And I personally won't have to. I can stop using the terms new rhythm too to describe the music that is reminiscent of rhythm but really isn't. That all kicked off because of that Labyrinth EP by Akeos. I don't know. I think that's more or less my thoughts. We should obviously keep the terms rhythm and future rhythm, but like I said, classic rhythm, that OG Square 4 sound, by all means call it trench. By all fucking means. I have no problem with that. And I guess everybody wins that way. the mainstream people can still call their shit rhythm, even though it really isn't. I mean, the term has lost definition, like Infect said, quite a bit over the last 5 years. But yeah, that'll just make it a little simpler for everybody. I just don't want the same thing to happen to Trench that has happened to rhythm, that people misuse it. Now, obviously, this is the definition that I've interpreted. I did read the definition of what Trench was supposed to be out of Infect's article, and this sounds a hell of a lot like OG classic rhythm, you know? But then if I listen to new rhythm stuff and it doesn't meet any of these guidelines, I'm just thinking, why would you rename that to Trench? So, yeah, that's my take on the situation. Hope that made sense. I might delete this video even. But thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching. I really didn't want to make this formal or anything, just get my thoughts out. To make a long story short, classic rhythm equals Trench, and rhythm equals rhythm. Why not? This has been your boy Joe. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to read this article all the way through. I mean, I basically read it through for y'all motherfuckers, but check it out again if something doesn't make sense. And hopefully Trench stays in the underground, not like underground to the point where they don't get any new fans. I'm just rambling at this point. I hope it stays as an underground term and doesn't get misused by the mainstream like Riddim did. And that'll just make everything easier for everybody. So, yeah, thank you all for watching. Follow my socials. Join my Discord. Follow my Twitter for news and updates. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye.